What is going on, everyone? Welcome back to this week's installment on The Lake Show, and I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day again. Last week, we obviously did another college football and NFL recap video, and we are continuing to do this series throughout the college football season and the NFL season. And with time winding down in the college football season, a lot of things are shaping up for a crazy finish for the 12-team playoff. And there's a lot happening in the NFL as far as power rankings and certain teams looking horrible but still winning. I'm going to talk about all of that, and I'm going to talk a little bit more NFL than I typically do. Because everybody knows that I know college football basically more than the average kid, more than the average 25-year-old, I would say at least. And, you know, just a bunch of other things have been happening in the NFL, especially this past Sunday, that definitely need to be discussed. So, as you all know, I'm a Bucked Up ambassador, so use promo code SHOW32, get yourself 20% off any and all pre-workout orders at buckedup.com. So, without delaying, again, I really appreciate you all making me a part of your day. I feel very blessed doing this. It's a very fun time, and winding down in the college football season, guess what? It's only going to get even crazier, that's for sure. So without hesitating anymore, let's go over some of the games that happened this past weekend in college football. I'm going to talk about 3 specific games, more in depth going forward, what it means for these said programs, and really just how that's going to shape the college football playoff. But first, we'll do an overview of said games from this past Saturday on November 9th. So number 1, Oregon handles Maryland 39-18. You know, Oregon, they're looking like the best team in college football, and it's just like week in and week out, they always manage to just look better. And, you know, especially after beating Ohio State in the fashion that they did, you know, Oregon, I feel like, is separating themselves from the pack just a little bit. Dylan Gabriel always plays fantastic, and he didn't really need to do much in this game, if we're being honest. Maryland, they're not necessarily a great team, but Oregon now 10-0, 7-0 in the Big Ten, and more than likely going to be one of the representatives in the Big Ten championship, and more than likely, after that, going to the college football playoff. But that's going to be a tricky situation just because of how the Big Ten is shaping up. There's 3 teams in the Big Ten that quite possibly could make the college football playoff. And the next team we're talking about right now is one of those teams. Number 2, Ohio State handles Purdue 45-0. So going forward, I talked about this weeks ago. I said Oregon would have beaten the Buckeyes that day when Oregon played Ohio State in Eugene, Oregon. I knew Oregon was going to win that game. I called it. You can look back at previous episodes. I called it. I knew Oregon would beat Ohio State that day. But going forward, if you told me that Ohio State would play Oregon in the Big Ten championship, I would take the Buckeyes. I think on a neutral field or in Columbus, I feel like Ohio State wins 9 out of 10 times. I'm really high on the Buckeyes right now, especially because another team basically crapped themselves this past weekend and shot themselves in the foot as far as college football playoff implications and conference championship implications. We'll talk about them in a little bit, the team I'm mentioning. But Ohio State handles business 45-0, and soon we will get the undefeated Indiana Hoosiers going to Ohio State to close out the year. And realistically, the winner of that game is going on to the Big Ten championship. And the winner of that game obviously gets a first-round bid and a first-round bye in the college football playoff. Is it possible that all 3 teams could make it into the college football playoff? Yes, absolutely. That's a possibility. Only if Ohio State beats Indiana and goes to the Big Ten championship. Other than that, I don't see that happening. If Indiana were to lose to Ohio State, they're sitting at 1 loss on the season. Obviously, they won't be a conference champion, and they won't even get to the conference championship in the Big Ten. But if you look at it, let's say Ohio State wins the Big Ten and beats Oregon. Well, you got a 1-loss Oregon and a 1-loss Indiana, and then a 1-loss Ohio State, who's also a conference champion. That'd be an interesting question if you would leave Indiana out. You wouldn't leave Oregon out. There's no chance. I think Oregon's a dead lock for the college football playoff, no matter which way that swings. Next game. Number 5, Texas handles Florida convincingly 49-17. Quinn Ewers actually looked apart again. He actually looked like the NFL caliber quarterback that we've been used to for the better part of 2 years. 333 passing yards, 5 touchdowns. Again, I know this is Florida, which Florida just recently came out and said that they were sticking with Billy Napier, which I don't really have a problem with, especially the kind of momentum that they've been playing with, at least. They're down to their third-string quarterback. I'm not entirely sure DJ Lagway played in this game, but regardless, they still had Georgia on the ropes literally a week ago before this past weekend. So I knew Florida. I still think Texas is going to win the SEC. I do. Ever since they lost to Georgia, Texas has been a quiet team. Nobody's giving them any attention. Yet they're number 5 in the nation, and they are more than likely going to the SEC championship, and more than likely will win the SEC championship and get a first-round bye in the college football playoff. Next game, Penn State, number 6 Penn State, 35 Washington 6. No surprises there. I'm not high on Washington. Both teams from the national championship from a year ago are both 5-5 this year. But that also goes to show you how much NFL talent was on Michigan and Washington's team. Number 7, Tennessee, 33. Mississippi State, 14. No surprises there. Mississippi State's awful. They're 2-8 on the season. And, Penn State, I feel like they're out of the Big Ten championship race right now. Can they still get into the playoff? Yes, but I think that's a very, very tough call to make. Like, if you put up Penn State over a one-loss Penn State, let's say Penn State runs the rest of the table, goes undefeated. One-loss Penn State versus a one-loss Indiana team, that one loss being to Ohio State. Well, the one loss, they would both have the same loss to Ohio State. I don't know if you necessarily leave them both out. I definitely don't think you put all 4 teams from the Big Ten in. Again, that's just my opinion. I'm not entirely sure. Number 9, BYU survives Utah 22-21, and BYU is still undefeated after this week, and more than likely will also be a group of 5 school that will make the college football playoff. That's possible. Same thing with Boise State, who just beat Nevada 28-21. How that's going to shape up, I'm not entirely sure. And one more game we're going to mention is number 10 Notre Dame beating the brakes off of Florida State 52-3, sending Florida State 1-9 on the season. This is the worst Florida State team I think I have ever seen in my entire life of how garbage they are. They have the lowest completion percentage at the quarterback position. And both of their quarterbacks, DJU and Brock Glenn, are both in the bottom 4 in college football in pass percentage, in completion percentage. That's horrible. Florida State also fired their defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, and their wide receivers coach. So Florida State is cleaning house. They're keeping Mike Norvell, at least for the time being, which I was always a fan of Mike Norvell. He rebuilt the program once. He'll rebuild it again. But something has to change. I don't necessarily think Mike Norvell is a good recruiter because they relied so heavily on the transfer portal for players, for personnel that can just make a difference. Well, you see the difference between the Hurricanes, their biggest rival, Miami. They hit their transfer portals. They hit on players in the transfer portal that make an immediate impact for the team. Whereas Florida State, we obviously saw DJ Uiagalelei was a nobody. He should have stayed in Oregon State. Okay, so now we're going to get into the 3 main games I want to talk about. This pains me to talk about, but number 4 Miami gets upset by the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets 28-23 in Atlanta, Georgia. All right. Obviously, everybody knows I'm a Miami fan. Everybody knows I'm a Miami bias. Everybody knows I'm a diehard Hurricane fan, and I'm going to defend this team no matter what. But I'm also a realistic Miami fan. The past few weeks, better part of about a month and a half, the Hurricanes have been playing with fire. It took a overturned Hail Mary call to beat Virginia Tech. It took Cam Ward throwing on his Superman cape against Cal, down 28 to win that game. They struggled with Duke a little bit. Obviously, they beat the brakes off Florida State, but everybody does that. This team has just been playing with fire the past couple weeks. You know, when I was little, I used to pretend touch the stove. Well, eventually, guess what? The more times you try to push the envelope, you're going to get burned. And that's exactly what happened to Miami this past week, and they just got burned. I'm amazed at the Tyler Santucci defense for Georgia Tech. I'm going to be honest, that was impressive to watch, even though I'm a Miami fan. I said it at the beginning of the year when Florida State was actually top 10, and everybody thought Florida State would be playing for the college football playoff possibility this year. I said that Georgia Tech would win that game. And if there was one team I was truly worried about for the season for Miami, it was Georgia Tech on the road. Because if you think about it, Georgia Tech I've always said that there are 3 teams in the ACC that always give Miami fits. That's North Carolina, that's Duke, and that's Georgia Tech. All of those teams have always been a thorn in the Hurricane sides. Now, this stings a little bit extra just because a year ago, Miami had Georgia Tech dead to rights, and all they had to do was take a knee. They didn't. They fumbled. Haynes King throws a touchdown pass, basically as time expires, to beat the Hurricanes and upset them. Well, this was an upset of immaculate proportions. I was amazed at the defensive prowess that Georgia Tech played with. That not necessarily the best defense in college football, but, you know, scrappy nonetheless. And a Hurricane team that's basically been averaging 450 yards a game. And, you know, Miami still had 400 yards in this game of total offense, but they were only 3 for 10 on third down. They were, I believe, 0 for 4 or 1 for 4 on fourth down conversions in this game, all in Georgia Tech territory. And Georgia Tech outrushed Miami 271 yards to 88 yards. That is just something that cannot happen in college football. That's just something that cannot happen when you're a top team in the country and looked at as a perennial powerhouse going forward for the college football playoff, at least offensively speaking. I don't know what's going on with Lance Guidry's defense. I really don't. They have seriously regressed from a year ago. With all the talent Miami has on the defensive side this year, I thought Miami's defense would have been probably a top 10 unit in the nation. Well, realistically, if they were, the Hurricanes would be unstoppable. If that defense was actually playing to the capability of the talent they have on that field, Miami would probably be rolling everybody by 40. At least they did earlier in the year, but the second they went up against competent offenses that actually have NFL talent on that said teams, you know, you see the result. I don't understand how badly the defense could have regressed when you have an immaculate front seven and at least 2 or 3 guys on the defensive front that will more than likely be first or second day draft picks in the NFL. Reuben Bain, Tyler Barron, and linebacker Francisco Mauigoa. Like, the Canes have guys on defense. I just don't understand how Lance Guidry's defense from a year ago looked like a stout unit and one of the best units in college football to now they're the thing that's holding the Hurricanes back. Now, granted, Miami on offense this was by far their worst performance throughout the entire season. This is the worst performance that the Hurricanes put on offense, at least from a third down standpoint and a fourth down standpoint. Miami is so used to picking up that. But the second a competent defense goes up and was able to slow down Cam Ward and not give him the amount of time that he's typically used to, you know, you could throw Miami off. And like I said, they ended up getting burned this week. You know, you play with fire long enough, you're going to end up getting burned. But going forward, I honestly think this was the best thing that could happen to the Hurricanes. But first, Brett Key at Georgia Tech, he's doing a phenomenal job. Kudos to him. You always look for that signature win when you're a new head coach, at least in college. You know, that shows that there's change coming to a program. Well, Brett Key and the defense led by Tyler Santucci, like, kudos to the Yellow Jackets. I'll give credit where credit is due, but I still think Miami was due for a loss. And personally, I think they needed a loss to come a little bit back down to earth. Now, they dropped 8 spots in the AP poll, but the AP poll doesn't really mean much going forward. It's the college football playoff rankings that matter. And going forward, Miami still controls their own destiny because of the Pitt Panthers losing. Miami, all they have to do is win out, and they will be in the ACC championship game against, more than likely, SMU. But I think this needed to happen to Cam Ward. This needed to happen to the Miami Hurricanes. I think this makes them a little bit more dangerous team because they've led the country in second half points, second half yards. This is the best second half team in all of college football. But again, you keep relying on that. Eventually, you keep poking the bear, you're going to get mauled. And that's exactly what happened to the Hurricanes this past weekend. But I think this loss brings them down to earth a little bit. They have more of a sense of urgency going forward. They're on a bye week this week. They got Wake Forest at home next week, and then the week after they finish the season against Syracuse on the road. It's doable for Miami. It's doable. And I think the Hurricanes can definitely still make the college football playoff. Now there's just no margin for error. They have to win out. That's the reality of the Hurricanes. If they want to be in the college football playoff, they have to run the table the remaining 2 games and win the ACC championship. Then they'll get a first-round bye in the college football playoff. But, I think this was needed for a team that was riding high, basically telling Cam Ward to put on your Superman cape and go save us. I think this gives them a new sense of urgency. I think the Canes come out more prepared over the next 2 games. I think this lights a fire under their ass. I think this was very important, and this needed to happen to them. And realistically, this was the best sort of situation, at least timing standpoint, for them to lose a game. So close to the end. I would rather them lose now than the ACC title game. And also throw in the Pitt loss where Miami still controls their own destiny going forward for the college football playoff. So Georgia Tech upsets the number 4 Hurricanes 28-23. All right, next game we're going to talk about. Number 16, Ole Miss upsets number 3 Georgia 28-10. I'm going to play a clip for you guys, and everybody was wondering, the first college football playoff rankings came out. It was Oregon at 1, Ohio State 2, Georgia 3, Miami 4. Obviously, Miami will not be 4th this week, but Georgia will not be 3 either. Everybody knows I love Joel Klatt. Everybody knows I love calling the herd with Colin Cowherd. Colin made a comment last week based off the college football playoff rankings, the initial ones. This is what he had to say about Ohio State being ranked in front of Georgia.
Is that if Georgia and Ohio State played tomorrow, I'd have to take Georgia. They've been better in big games. And I don't think Ohio State could have.
But have they?
Well, Ohio State could not have gone to Texas and physically humiliate Texas like that. I don't believe they could have done that.
Okay. So Colin Cowherd really loves Georgia. But I said this last week. Georgia's been playing with fire, too. Literally a week ago, they struggled with a Florida team that was on their 3rd-string quarterback who really hasn't taken any meaningful snaps in college, and they damn near pulled it off until Georgia pulled away late. Well, now you face an actual team with Jackson Dart at the quarterback position, an NFL quarterback, at least in my opinion, Lane Kiffin, one of the best offensive minds in college football. I had a feeling that Ole Miss would. I didn't necessarily predict that they would beat Georgia, but I did think that they would give them a game. But this wasn't close. 28-10. And here's what my biggest issue when it comes to what Colin Cowherd said last week. I said weeks ago that college football is looking more like the NFL every single week, every single year, because of how much NFL talent at the quarterback position there are. I feel like in college, you need a quarterback that has NFL potential. Jackson Dart definitely has that. He just threw for 500 yards last week against Arkansas, and everybody thought Arkansas was going to beat Ole Miss. That didn't happen. But Jackson Dart in this game, 13 of 22, 199 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 pick. Okay. Well, Ole Miss also outrushed the Bulldogs 134 to 59. That is just not something you would typically see from a Georgia team. But here's the biggest issue with Georgia. It's quarterback play. I have been on Carson Beck for weeks now. He's playing the worst football of his career right now. He went 20 of 31, 186 yards, no touchdowns, 1 pick. Carson Beck has a turnover problem. Carson Beck has been throwing multiple interceptions over the better part of a month. This is the worst part of Georgia right now. Their defense is still great. They got offensive weapons. Don't tell me they don't have talent. I'll be the first to tell you that they have talent on the offensive side of the football. Their quarterback is playing terrible right now. That is my biggest indictment on Georgia and has been for the better part of 3 weeks or 4 weeks. They got a couple breaks during that Texas game. I know the final score would suggest that Georgia absolutely railroaded Texas in Austin. When you look at that game, the Georgia defense is the reason that they won. They constantly got Texas off the field. They finally gave their offense so many short fields to deal with. And yet some calls went their way that realistically should have resulted in Texas points. That final score that looks like Georgia handled Texas, that's a lot closer than people think, at least in my opinion. But Carson Beck had a short field to work with in Texas. So, realistically, if you're given an okay quarterback a short field to work with, 9 out of 10 times you're going to get points out of that drive. But right now, the fact that Carson Beck is playing so god-awful, this is the biggest reason that I don't think Georgia is a national championship contender. There's teams at the top are starting to separate themselves. We get that. But this is college football. Anything can happen. Georgia Tech just beat Miami. We understand that. Ole Miss just beat Georgia. We understand that. And we're going to talk about Alabama next. And they rolled LSU, but we'll get to that in a minute. But my biggest problem for Georgia going forward has been Carson Beck's inability to take care of the football. This man has been turning the ball over left and right for week in, week out. Carson Beck is playing the worst football of his life right now. That is what's hindering Georgia. He can't get it done. Carson Beck came back because he felt like there was something left in the tank, something unfulfilled from a year ago, missing out on the college football playoff. Coming back this year, yes, week 1 against Clemson, they looked like the best team in college football. Now, no. I wouldn't even put them top 5, top 6, top 7. Same thing with Miami. I'm going to hold them to the same standard, but compared to Cam Ward still showed up against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech just made the best stops possible at the most important times of the game, on 4th down and on 3rd down, where Miami has feasted on all year long. Like I said, Miami just got burned. Same thing applies to Georgia, only their quarterback is the reason that they are not successful right now. He is the reason that they look inept on offense. That's the reality of Georgia. I'm not huge on Georgia. Especially after this past weekend. I think Carson Beck is still a good quarterback. Is he what people thought he was? Absolutely not. I have come around on guys like Shedeur Sanders. He's starting to look like an NFL quarterback. I thought for the longest time it was just a product of Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn and the skill position players surrounding Shedeur Sanders. But my top 2 quarterbacks in college football right now, still Cam Ward, but also Shedeur Sanders. I think those 2 are clear-cut first-round quarterbacks. Easily, I don't think there's much debate when it comes to that. But Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin gets his signature win against Kirby Smart at Ole Miss, 28-10. Now we're going to move on to our final game we're going to talk about. Alabama Crimson Tide going on the road to LSU, 42-13. Alabama absolutely rolled the Tigers in LSU. This was not a game at all for the majority of this game. You know, Jalen Milroe, he went 12 of 18, 109 yards, no touchdowns, no picks. Okay. You know, if I told you that that's the stat line that Milroe would have passing the football, you probably would have thought that LSU was probably going to honestly dominate the game. Not even close. Alabama, as a team, rushed for 311 yards compared to LSU's 104. Jalen Milroe, 12 carries, 185 yards, 4 touchdowns. That's the big difference. LSU, I thought there was no way, the way Alabama has been playing, would have went into LSU, notoriously one of the toughest places to play in all of college football, and beat LSU. I had no faith in Alabama to right the ship. I thought their college football playoff hopes were done, over with. I thought it was going to end this past weekend. Well, the complete opposite happened. 42-13 against LSU in LSU. LSU, goodbye. Your playoff hopes are officially done. The SEC, there's too many good teams in the SEC. LSU could not have afforded to lose this game. But they did. And now they are definitely out of the college football playoff, conversation. But I think this is more important for Kalen DeBoer at Alabama, because if Kalen DeBoer lost this game, somehow, some way, I know that doesn't seem feasible at this point. It didn't seem that way after the first half of football, give or take. But I think Kalen DeBoer, nobody needed this win more than Kalen DeBoer, because you're filling in for Nick Saban, you're filling in for the greatest college football coach of all time. There is a standard at Alabama that has been set by Nick Saban and that has been held up by Nick Saban for the better part of 20 years. If anybody needed to win this past weekend, it was head coach Kalen DeBoer from Bama. It was him. Because if he lost this game, somehow, some way, if he lost this game, everybody would be calling for his job right now. And he would be looked at as a failure in year one in Alabama, and looked as probably unworthy to fill the shoes of Nick Saban. But he's still I think he was a great coach. I still think Kalen DeBoer is a great coach. But compared to Washington and what was the Pac-12, SEC football is so much different. It's just a different animal. It's just a completely different animal. And Jalen Milroe, I've knocked him over the past couple weeks because of how turnover prone he's become. He's starting to right the ship a little bit. I was comparing him to Carson Beck. Carson Beck looks a lot worse. I'm definitely more of a Jalen Milroe fan than Carson Beck. But Milroe's run attack, rushing yards, 185 rushing yards and 4 touchdowns. Like, that's one of the most impressive stat lines for a rushing quarterback I've ever seen. And that includes guys like Lamar Jackson and, Johnny Manziel, Cam Newton. Those guys through college. They had impressive numbers too running the football. But as far as a single game, this was probably the most impressive attack I've ever seen by Jalen Milroe, at least from a running perspective. He was efficient on the passing attack, 12 of 18. That's not terrible, but only 109 yards. And, Alabama as a whole, they didn't necessarily do great when it comes to receiving yards, but they didn't need to because of how dominant Alabama was running the football. So Alabama heads to LSU and absolutely whoops Brian Kelly's Tigers 42-13. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the AllState College Football Playoff Predictor. Obviously, the numbers have changed over the past couple weeks, especially over this past weekend. So we're going to go over at least the percentages of teams that could possibly still make the college football playoff and going forward. So Oregon's at the highest with 95% chance, then followed by Indiana 93, Ohio State 92, Texas 82, Penn State 81, Alabama 76, Tennessee 74, Georgia 73, Boise State 71, Notre Dame 66, Ole Miss 61, Miami 60. So those are all the teams that are 60% and above for chances to make the college football playoff. I told everybody, like the top 3 teams with the highest chance to make it, I think that'll sort itself out a little bit, obviously. 4 of the top 5 teams are for the highest chances to make the college football playoff. They're all in the Big Ten. But that's going to shape itself out. That's going to sort itself out. And then you got Texas, Bama, Tennessee, and Georgia, and Ole Miss in the top 12. So as far as the best chances to make the college football playoff, that will sort itself out too, because I believe Ole Miss still plays Alabama. I know Alabama, more than likely it's going to be Texas and Bama in the SEC championship. The loser of that game more than likely could be knocked out. I know Texas only has 1 loss. I think Alabama needs to win the SEC title game in order to be a definitive lock, which obviously they would be if they won the college football. If they won the SEC championship, they get an automatic bid. But looking at this, followed by Miami at 60%, you have BYU at 59%, then a dramatic drop, SMU at 38%, Colorado at 27%, Army at 26%, Clemson at 17%, Kansas State at 16%. Okay. I think BYU will be a lock. SMU is a lock only if they win the ACC championship. That's the only path for SMU. I think they will be left out if they don't win the ACC. But it's the same thing. It's the same thing for Miami. It's the same thing. It's the same argument. If Miami ends up winning out and winning the ACC, they're in. If SMU wins out and wins the ACC, they're in. If there's one team that they can possibly still make it, it would have been Miami had they been undefeated and only losing the ACC championship, if that was the case that ended up happening. Now that they lost, I think that whoever wins the ACC, that is the only ACC team that will get into the college football playoff. I'm not convinced Clemson has a chance anymore. I know they're at 17%, but looking at how they're playing, not necessarily great. LSU dropped all the way to 7%. I don't see any roadmap where LSU can possibly make a comeback and make the college football playoff, but this is the college football playoff predictor, at least those who have the best chance to make the college football playoff. Going forward, I think we're in for an immaculate finish these last 3 weeks of the college football season, regular season speaking, and then eventually we'll go over to conference championship games and the playoff implications for that. But now we are going to transition to the NFL. And there's a couple games I want to go over for this, because this is hysterical. So the Denver Broncos lose to the Kansas City Chiefs 16-14. I can't stand the Chiefs anymore. They are the luckiest team in the NFL. You want to know why? Because of crap like this.
Fraboni the snap, Riley the hold, Lutz the kick to win it. Oh! Blocked! The Chiefs have won!
I can't think of any team that is less deserving of winning than the Kansas City Chiefs right now. Patrick Mahomes is playing the worst football of his life, and yet somehow the Chiefs are still winning games. I want to know if that left guard for the Broncos on that field goal attempt got paid money to blow that. As you see him step back, there's no way he took that step back seriously. He just got put on his ass, and they ended up blocking the game-winning field goal. This drives me up a wall. It's so ridiculous of how the Chiefs keep winning. It really is. Patrick Mahomes is not playing good at all. Patrick Mahomes, I wouldn't even consider him right now a top 5 quarterback, at least playing-wise, in the NFL right now. There is no shot Patrick Mahomes is a top 5 quarterback currently right now in the NFL. Absolutely not. That play alone just makes me realize how BS it is for the Chiefs right now. It drives me insane. Everybody's going to call me bitter, and everybody's going to acknowledge the Chiefs' greatness, Mahomes' greatness. Okay, they are relying heavily on their defense. This is the best defense in the entire NFL. I'm thoroughly convinced of that because, Patrick, there is no way. Like, if Russell Wilson was playing this bad for Pittsburgh, he wouldn't be 3-0 in Pittsburgh as the starting quarterback in the NFL. He wouldn't be. If this is the way Lamar Jackson was playing, they would not be a 7-3 team. You know, if any other quarterback was playing like this for their team, they'd be losing so many games in a row. The fact that the Chiefs have literally the best defense in the NFL, and I'm thoroughly convinced of that because there is no way the way Patrick Mahomes is playing results in an undefeated season so far. There is no plausible reason the Chiefs should be undefeated. Here's what I want. I want the Chiefs undefeated when they go to Pittsburgh on Christmas Day. I think the Pittsburgh Steelers would beat the brakes off of the Chiefs, off of this current Chiefs team right now. So Kansas City, they survive yet again, 16-14 off a blocked last-second field goal attempt by the Denver Broncos in ridiculous fashion. Okay, so other games we're going to go over. The Ravens 35, the Bengals 34 from a week ago. I feel so bad for Joe Burrow. He is playing out of his mind football, yet Zach Taylor, is he really a good head coach? Let's be honest about Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow comes into the league, inherits the worst offensive line in football, inherits the cheapest ownership group in the entirety of the NFL, maybe other than Davis from the Raiders. But he inherits a terrible O-line, not many skill players, a terrible defense, the cheapest owner group, and a head coach that realistically isn't proven. He gets hurt his first year. The second year, behind statistically one of the worst offensive line in the NFL at that point, he made a Super Bowl. Now, they went up against the juggernaut Rams at that point, but Stafford, Kupp, Odell Beckham, Aaron Donald, you know, they went up against just a superior team. They ran out of gas at that point. It's just the fact that Joe Burrow is doing everything humanly possible to keep the Bengals in it, to keep the Bengals in playoff contention. They're 4-6 on the year, but I don't see a path forward for the Bengals. And I think the Bengals have failed Joe Burrow. This is their franchise. This is the most talented quarterback. I will go to my grave saying this, that Joe Burrow is the most talented quarterback the Bengals have ever had. And that includes like Boomer Esiason, who ended up getting them to a Super Bowl. There is no reason Zach Taylor I don't think he's a good head coach at all. I think he constantly fails Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow basically throws for 400 yards a game, 4 touchdowns a game, or 3 touchdowns a game, and yet the Bengals always lose in these shootout games because that's the only way they can win. Their defense is atrocious. Their offensive line is horrible. They have no sense of a run game. If there's one team I do feel bad for, it's the Cincinnati Bengals. And I know I'm a Steeler fan, but I feel bad for Cincy. Okay, we're going to go over 2 more games. The Patriots end up beating the Bears 19-3. Let's talk about the Bears real quick. And I'm not going to get too hard on Caleb Williams because he's a rookie. But it's the same damn thing happening to Caleb Williams that happened to Justin Fields in Chicago. Matt Eberflus at head coach. I'm not one to call for people's jobs, but something's got to change in Chicago. The fact that you had one of your cornerbacks taunting and talking smack while the play was going on against the Commanders, and you end up tipping the ball and losing on that play. That was still the worst coaching job in NFL history, probably in the second half. And looking at the Bears, the fact that the 3-7 New England Patriots basically boat raced you. I know that's 19-3 necessarily isn't a blowout score. The Bears can't do anything right on offense. They have Cole Kmet. They have DJ Moore. They have Rome Odunze. They have DeAndre Swift. Like, they have offensive talent. They have a quarterback that is more than likely the most talented quarterback in the entire history of the franchise, but they still have a terrible offensive line. And the Bears' strong suit is the defense. And that defense is starting to break because they cannot generate any offense. The fact that Caleb Williams looks like he started off the year slow, then slowly got better, and now is coming back down to earth and kind of regressing a little bit. I think that all stems from the McCaskies, the owners of the Bears, and Matt Eberflus, the head coach. Stop hiring defensive coaches to develop quarterbacks. There's a reason defensive coaches work, like Mike Tomlin and Pete Carroll. There's a reason that those guys work, is because they hire people that at least have a chance. Now, maybe it doesn't pan out, especially in Pittsburgh's case, more than likely over the past 5 years. But Arthur Smith is starting to look better for Pittsburgh. Russell Wilson looks better and competent in Pittsburgh. You know, Mike Tomlin has the defense shored up in Pittsburgh. You can't even say the same for the Bears right now, and that's their strong suit. They've been a defensive culture for the better part of 50 years. The best offensive player they've ever had was Walter Payton, and they barely did anything for that man. That man carried that franchise damn near his entire career. It's ridiculous. The Bears, possibly one of the worst run franchises in the NFL. And that's not even close. That's just plain, it's ridiculous that you have that much talent on the offense and you can't do anything with it. Final game we're going to talk about. The Pittsburgh Steelers go on the road to Washington and beat the Commanders 28-27. You know, Russell Wilson is still looking great in Pittsburgh. You know, I was wrong. You know, Russell Wilson now starting for Pittsburgh, I think that was the right decision. And I called it that Jaden Daniels, you know, he threw for 50%. He had 50% completion percentage in this game, the lowest of the season so far. And that's because he's playing Pittsburgh's defense, the one that is probably next to Kansas City the best in the NFL, if we're being honest. And going forward, I think he's earned himself the starting position. And maybe even, who knows what the future holds for Russell Wilson. But I think realistically, you can look at the Pittsburgh Steelers at 7-2. I think they're one of the most dangerous teams to play in the AFC. Russell Wilson didn't light up the scoreboard like he did the first two games with Pittsburgh. You know, they only scored 28 points, but I'll still take that because that's more than what Pittsburgh is accustomed to for the better part of 10 years. For the better part of 5 to 6 years, sorry. But now, when you look at the AFC, what teams come to mind? Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Buffalo, Kansas City. 4 teams that I can realistically see competing for a Super Bowl. You know, I don't buy the Patriots at all. They stink. I don't buy the Bengals. I don't buy the Dolphins. I don't buy the Colts. I don't buy the Broncos. You know, realistically, 4 teams in the AFC, I think, can make a push for the Super Bowl. Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Kansas City, and Buffalo. Those are my 4 teams that realistically I can see coming out of the AFC and possibly winning the Super Bowl. And I still think the Lions are still the best team in football. Even though Jared Goff had probably the worst passing game of his career, they still ended up winning. 5 interceptions on the night. 2 touchdowns, 5 interceptions for Jared Goff. And a lot of that was the Houston Texans defense. They were really getting after Jared Goff in this game. But, you know, Jared Goff, calm, cool, collected, doesn't let any interceptions, throw him off. You know, I still think the Lions are the best team in the NFL. They're damn sure better than the Chiefs. You know, this was Jared Goff's probably worst game, one of his worst games as a pro, and yet the Lions still won and now improved 8-1 on the season. One final story we're going to talk about. The Eagles 34, the Cowboys 6. Cowboys fall to 3-6 on the year. I hate the argument that, Dallas would be better if Dak Prescott didn't get hurt and didn't undergo season-ending surgery. No, that is absolutely not the case. You paid that man $60 million a year for B+ quarterback play. Jerry Jones acts like Dak Prescott is Patrick Mahomes. He's not. As much as Patrick Mahomes is playing like garbage right now, you could put Pat Mahomes on the Cowboys roster, he would probably make it work. That Cowboys team would probably realistically be like a 7-2 team if Pat Mahomes was quarterback. Looking at Dak Prescott, when you guys had him in the first place, he wasn't playing good. So don't act like Cooper Rush coming in is going to be so much worse. As a matter of fact, it might be even a little bit better. But it's the fact that Jerry Jones decided to pay this man $60 million a year for 2 playoff wins in his entire career, in his 8-year career, only 2 playoff wins, chose to hold off on paying CeeDee Lamb, holding off to pay Micah Parsons, didn't call Derrick Henry, didn't make any offseason moves worth note to help out the offense or the defense. The defense is a tire fire. The organization is a tire fire. And it's all because of Jerry Jones and his pride and his ego. He gets in his own damn way. But hey, you could still tour the, Dallas Cowboys Stadium and everything. You could still do that. $60 million a year, what a waste. This might be up there with one of the worst contracts in NFL history. It might be worse than the Russell Wilson contract to Denver, because at least Russell Wilson is playing pretty good right now for Pittsburgh. He's playing really well. He might be returning to a little bit of form from Seattle Russell Wilson. But right now, looking at Dak Prescott, I feel bad that he's injured, but the fact that he is injured shows that, shouldn't have paid him $60 million a year for a quarterback that's now sitting on the bench. And you're basically locked into that contract for the next arbitrary amount of years. Dallas Cowboys accident waiting to happen. And the accident is Jerry Jones, because he cannot get out of his own way. Holding off to pay players, not making calls in the offseason, not drafting properly, allows no outside opinion. They keep all opinions in-house and family-oriented. That's not the way to run it in the NFL. The reason the Cowboys are a tire fire organization is because they have a tire fire owner, not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense that he loves to make personnel decisions and player decisions that just don't pan out. He is the reason the Cowboys are so inept. And that's going to wrap it up this week on The Lake Show, everyone. I really appreciate you all making me part of your day again. Be sure to like, subscribe, share with your friends, leave some comments down below. I'm your host, Dominic Lako. God bless.
I love the chase and the hunt, and I set the pace when I'm running. I always take what I want and I always give it 100. Don't need a bank, no, I'm funded. Play the game like it's nothing. I'm always thankful for something. Don't take for granted, stay humble. Now wake up, it's time to look at the enemy. Look in the mirror if he is no friend to me. It's not working out, maybe it's the chemistry. It's time to break up so I can make a better me. Better believe in your mind.